Right now, your grass is doing something almost nobody talks about at the garden centre. It's eating through its leaves, not its roots, its leaves. Every blade out there is covered in a waxy layer thinner than a soap bubble, and certain molecules are small enough to slip right through it and go straight into the plant. No soil, no waiting, no hoping the roots find it. And there is one fertilizer sitting on the bottom shelf of almost every farm supply store in the country that happens to be the perfect size and shape to do exactly that. It's white, it looks like tiny hail, it costs about 50 cents a pound, and the amount you need to cover a 5,000 square foot yard weighs less than a can of soda. I did the math on this last spring because I got tired of paying $38 for a bag of lawn food that promised a deep green boost and delivered a lawn that looked exactly the same 14 days later. When I ran the numbers on what I actually paid for the nitrogen inside that bag versus what I could buy the same nitrogen for in a plain white sack, I honestly sat there and rechecked it twice. Then I mixed my first batch. And when I dropped the pellets into the water, the jar got cold. Not cool, cold, like I'd dropped ice in it. That's when I realized there was some actual chemistry happening here that nobody had ever bothered to explain to me. So let's get into it, because there's a right way to do this and a way that fries your lawn into yellow stripes in about 40 minutes, and the difference between them is smaller than you'd think. What almost nobody tells you about how grass eats. Here's what most people don't realize about fertilizer. When you throw down granules and water them in, you're not feeding the grass. You're feeding the soil and then hoping the soil hands it off. That handoff is messy. Some of it gets grabbed by microbes. Some of it locks up with clay. Some of it runs off if you get a heavy rain in the next 2 days. And a big chunk of it, especially with dry urea sitting on top of thatch in warm weather, just evaporates into the air as ammonia gas before the roots ever see it. Research on surface-applied urea has measured losses in that range routinely, and on a thick, thatchy, warm lawn, it can be worse. You paid for 100% of that nitrogen. Your grass got a fraction of it. Foliar feeding skips the whole middleman. And here's the part that makes urea special, which took me years to understand. Most fertilizer nutrients are charged particles, ions. Things like calcium and iron and phosphate carry an electrical charge, and that charge makes it very hard for them to cross the waxy cuticle on a leaf. It's like trying to push a magnet through a wall that repels magnets. Urea is different. Urea is a small, uncharged molecule, 60 grams per mole, which in plain English means it's one of the tiniest nutrient molecules in the whole fertilizer world. It's polar, it's neutral, and it slides through the leaf cuticle faster than almost anything else you can spray. Once it's inside, the plant already has the enzyme it needs, called urease, waiting to break it apart and put that nitrogen straight into protein production. That's why golf course superintendents have been doing this for decades. They call it spoon feeding. Tiny amounts, sprayed often, absorbed almost immediately. Instead of one big feast and a famine, the grass gets a steady drip. But that's only part of the story. Because the real reason this is interesting isn't the science, it's the price tag. The cost math that made me feel ridiculous. Let's do this slowly, because when you see it laid out, you can't unsee it. Urea is 4600. That means it's 46% nitrogen by weight, the highest concentration of any common dry nitrogen fertilizer on the shelf. A 50-pound bag runs somewhere around $25, depending on where you live and what the market's doing that year. Some places it's 22, some places it's 32, call it 25. That's 50 cents a pound. Now, for a light foliar feed, you're applying about 1/10 of a pound of actual nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. That's the sweet spot. It's low enough that the leaf can absorb it without damage, and high enough that you'll see a response. To get 1/10 of a pound of nitrogen out of a bag that's 46% nitrogen, you divide. 0.1 divided by 0.46. That gives you about 0.22 pounds of urea, which is 3.5 ounces, which is right around 100 grams. 100 grams per 1,000 square feet, that's it. At 50 cents a pound, 3.5 ounces of urea cost you 11 cents. If your yard is 5,000 square feet, which is a pretty typical suburban lot. After you subtract the house and driveway, you need about 1.1 pounds. That's 55 cents per application for the entire yard. Now spread that across a season. If you do a light feed every 2 to 3 weeks through the growing season, that's roughly 8 applications. 8 times 55 cents is $4.40. $4 for the season on a 5,000 square foot lawn. I want to be fair here because I'm not going to pretend a bag of name-brand fertilizer is a scam. You're paying for coated slow-release technology, you're paying for a blend that includes potassium and micronutrients, you're paying for convenience and a spreader setting printed on the bag. Those things have value. But when your goal is specifically color and density during the growing season, and you're willing to spend 20 minutes with a sprayer, the cost difference is not small. It's not 20%. It's an order of magnitude. And that £50 bag? At £1 per application, it lasts you around 45 applications. That's 5 or 6 seasons for a typical yard. One bag. But here's where things get interesting and where a lot of people go wrong. Because the moment you hear cheap nitrogen, the temptation is to use more of it. And more is exactly what will burn your lawn. Why the jar gets cold and what that tells you. The first time you mix this, do it in a clear jar so you can watch what happens. Put warm tap water in, drop in the urea, and put your hand on the outside of the glass. Within about 30 seconds, it'll feel noticeably colder than when you started. That's not a trick. Dissolving urea is an endothermic reaction, which means it pulls heat energy out of its surroundings to break apart the crystal structure. It's the same principle behind those instant cold packs you get for a sprained ankle. Some of them are literally urea and water in a bag with a divider you snap. Why does this matter for your lawn? 2 reasons. First, it's a free confirmation that your urea is actually dissolving and not just sitting in the bottom of the tank as sludge. Urea is extremely soluble, more than £1 per quart of water at room temperature, so at the rates we're talking about, it disappears almost instantly. If it isn't dissolving, your product is caked from moisture and needs to be replaced. Second, and this is the one people miss, cold water slows it down noticeably. If you're mixing on a chilly spring morning with cold hose water, give it an extra minute and agitate. Undissolved prills that get through your filter will clog a nozzle, and a clogged nozzle is how you end up with a beautiful green lawn with one pale stripe running through it. Now before we mix a full batch, there's one thing on the bag you need to check, and I'd bet 95% of homeowners have never heard of it. The contaminant nobody mentions. When urea is manufactured, if the process runs too hot, some of it converts into a compound called urea. Urea looks harmless on a lab sheet. It's not harmless on a leaf. Urea interferes with nitrogen metabolism inside plant tissue, and because foliar spraying puts it in direct contact with the leaf, it does damage at concentrations that wouldn't matter at all if you'd applied it to the soil. You'll see leaf tip burn, chlorosis, mottling. And most people who see that damage blame the nitrogen rate when the actual culprit was contamination. For soil application, nobody cares. Standard agricultural urea is fine. For foliar application, you want low biuret, and the number to look for is under 1%, ideally under 0.25%. Fertilizer-grade urea from a reputable supplier is usually well under 1%. Feed-grade urea, the kind sold for cattle rations, is typically the lowest of all because livestock can't tolerate it either. If the bag or the spec sheet lists it, read it. If it doesn't, ask or start with a test patch. That's a 30-second check that will save you a season of frustration, and it leads right into the thing that actually causes most foliar burn. Concentration is everything, and volume is how you control it. Here's the concept that changed how I think about spraying. Anything, the rate you apply, meaning how much nitrogen lands per 1,000 square feet, is one number. The concentration, meaning how strong the solution is inside your tank, is a completely different number. And it's concentration that burns leaves, not rate. You can apply the exact same 1/10 of a pound of nitrogen 2 ways. Dissolve it in a gallon of water and you've got roughly a 2.5% solution, which cool season turf handles comfortably. Dissolve it in a quart and you've got a 10% solution, which will scorch your lawn in the sun and leave you with brown stipple across every blade. Same amount of fertilizer, wildly different outcome. So the rule to burn into your memory is this: 1 gallon of water per 1,000 square feet minimum, and never go past about 3% concentration. For a 5,000 square foot yard, that's 5 gallons of water and roughly a pound of urea. If you have a 4-gallon backpack sprayer, mix 100 grams per gallon and treat 4,000 square feet per tank. Clean, simple, repeatable. Now there's a competing pressure here worth knowing about. If you spray too much water, say 5 gallons per 1,000 square feet, the solution runs straight off the leaf and lands on the soil. Which isn't the end of the world, but at that point you're doing a soil feed, not a foliar feed, and you've lost the efficiency advantage that made this whole thing worth doing. Foliar uptake wants the solution to sit on the leaf surface and stay slightly damp long enough to be absorbed. Which brings up timing, and this is the piece that separates a good result from a mediocre one. The timing window. Most people get backwards uptake through the cuticle happens while the solution is still wet on the leaf. Once it dries into a crust, absorption mostly stops, and whatever's left is either washed off by dew or lost to the air. So the enemy is fast drying, which means the worst possible time to do this is exactly when most people mow and do yard work, which is midday on a sunny Saturday with a breeze. That solution is dry in 10 minutes and you've wasted most of it. The best window is early evening, an hour or two before sunset. Temperature is dropping, humidity is climbing, the sun isn't cooking the leaf surface, and dew forms overnight, which keeps the solution in solution and extends uptake for hours. Early morning works too if you've got heavy dew and a cool start. Skip it entirely if the temperature is above the mid-80s, if the lawn is drought-stressed and wilting, or if you're in the middle of a humid stretch where brown patch and dollar spot are already showing up. Pushing nitrogen into stressed or disease-pressured turf is asking for trouble, and I'll come back to that. Also, don't spray if rain is coming within about 4 hours, you'll just wash it off. And on the flip side, if this is your very first time and you're nervous, you can rinse the lawn with a light watering 4 to 6 hours after application. You'll lose a little uptake, but you'll have essentially zero burn risk while you build confidence. Alright, let's talk about the thing that ruins more foliar applications than concentration and timing combined. The tiger stripes aren't from your mower. You've seen a lawn with pale stripes and dark stripes running in bands. Almost everybody blames the mower or the sun angle. A lot of the time, it's the sprayer. Here's what's happening. A standard pump-up sprayer starts at high pressure and loses it steadily as you spray. High pressure means a wide fan and a fine droplet. Low pressure means a narrow fan and big, sloppy droplets. So the first 30 feet of your pass gets a wide, even band, and the last 30 feet gets a narrow, heavy one. Multiply that across a whole yard, and you get bands of light green and dark green that show up 4 days later and take 3 weeks to grow out. With nitrogen, every mistake in coverage becomes visible because color response is proportional to dose. This is not like spraying weeds where you either hit it or you didn't. Here, the lawn draws you a map of your sloppiness. So here's how to fix it. And it costs nothing. Pump the sprayer back up every 15 or 20 steps to keep pressure in a narrow band. Better yet, if you're doing this regularly, a battery-powered sprayer holds constant pressure automatically, and it's the single best upgrade you can make. Use a flat fan nozzle, not a cone. A fan gives you a defined edge and an even distribution across the width. A cone concentrates in the middle and feathers out, which makes overlap almost impossible to judge. Then the big one, split the application in half and spray in 2 directions. Instead of putting your full rate down in one pass north to south, mix your batch and spray half of it north to south, then spray the other half east to west across the same area. Any gap you leave in the first direction gets covered in the second. Any heavy spot gets averaged out. This one habit will do more for your results than any product you can add to the tank. And walk at a steady pace. Most people slow down when they're thinking and speed up near the end when they're tired, which lays down a heavy start and a light finish. 2 simple tests you can do before you ever spray fertilizer. Before you mix a single gram of urea, do this. Fill your sprayer with plain water. Mark off an area of exactly 1,000 square feet, which is 20 by 50 feet or 25 by 40. Now spray that area the way you normally would, walking your normal pace with your normal overlap. Then check how much water you used. If you used 1 gallon, you're calibrated. If you used 2.5 gallons, you're walking too slow, and every application you've ever done has been heavier than you thought. If you used half a gallon, you're moving too fast and half your lawn isn't getting what you think it's getting. That 5-minute test tells you more about your fertilizing than any product label, and it's the reason 2 people can follow the exact same instructions and get completely different lawns. The second test is even simpler, and it's the one that will actually prove to you whether this is working. Before you spray, lay a board or a piece of cardboard about 3 feet long somewhere in the middle of a visible section of lawn. Spray right over it. When you're done, pick it up. Now you have an untreated check strip sitting inside a treated lawn, with identical soil, identical sun, identical mowing. In 4 to 6 days, walk out and look at that strip. If foliar nitrogen is doing anything, you will see a clean line. Not a subtle difference you have to squint at. A line. That check strip also tells you when to stop. If the difference is dramatic, your lawn was hungry and you should keep going. If after 2 applications you can barely find the line, your soil nitrogen is already adequate and you're spending money and mowing time for nothing. Move that board to a different spot each time and you get a running report card. Reading the response and knowing when you've overdone it. Here's what a correct light foliar feed looks like. Color deepens in 2 to 4 days, which is dramatically faster than the 7 to 14 days you'd wait on a granular application. Growth increases modestly. Density improves over several weeks as the plant puts energy into new tillers. Here's what too much looks like. Color goes almost blue-green and slightly glossy. Clipping volume doubles, so you're bagging twice as much and mowing twice as often. Blades get soft and floppy instead of standing up. And within a few weeks, if the weather turns warm and humid, you start seeing disease. That last one is the hidden consequence nobody warns you about. Lush nitrogen-push tissue has thinner cell walls and higher moisture content, and fungal pathogens like brown patch move through it like it's an open door. Every turf pathology text will tell you that excessive nitrogen going into summer heat is one of the strongest predictors of disease pressure. So if you're in the middle of a hot, humid stretch, that's the time to back off, not the time to push. Nitrogen also isn't a complete diet. Grass needs potassium for cell wall strength and stress tolerance, phosphorus for root development, iron and manganese for chlorophyll. If your lawn has been green pushed with nitrogen alone for 2 seasons, you can end up with a top-heavy plant sitting on a weak root system, which looks great in May and collapses in August. So the honest framing is this: foliar urea is the cheapest, fastest color and density tool you have. It is not a soil program. Get a soil test every couple of years, correct your pH and your potassium and any real deficiencies, and then use this as the thing that keeps color steady between the bigger, slower corrections. 2 cheap upgrades worth adding. If you want to stretch this further, 2 additions are worth the money. The first is a few drops of non-ionic surfactant per gallon. Grass blades are waxy and vertical, which is a terrible combination for holding a spray droplet. Surfactant breaks surface tension, so the solution spreads into a film across the leaf instead of beading up and rolling off into the thatch. More leaf contact, more uptake, same amount of fertilizer. A bottle costs about $10 and lasts years. A tiny drop of plain dish soap works in a pinch, but it's inconsistent, and some formulations contain additives you don't want, so use the real thing if you can. The second is ferrous sulfate, which is iron. Here's why it pairs so well. Nitrogen gives you color by driving growth. Iron gives you color without driving growth, because it's a direct component of chlorophyll production. So if what you actually want is a darker lawn and not more mowing, iron does that job better than nitrogen ever will. 1/2 ounce per 1,000 square feet in the same tank, mixed thoroughly. Fair warning, it stains concrete, so keep it off the driveway and sidewalks. What this really comes down to: strip everything else away, and the lesson is this: grass has a second mouth. Most homeowners never use it, and the cheapest fertilizer on the shelf happens to be the one molecule small enough to fit through it. 100 grams per 1,000 square feet, 1 gallon of water, evening application, 2 passes at right angles, cardboard check strip, that's the whole system, and it runs a season for less than the price of a couple of coffees. But the thing I keep coming back to isn't the money. It's that for years I was buying results I couldn't measure, from bags I couldn't verify, on a schedule somebody else printed on the back. The moment I laid a board down on my own lawn and saw the line 4 days later, I stopped guessing. And once you can measure what you're doing, you stop overpaying for the parts that were never doing anything. Have you ever checked whether your lawn actually needs the fertilizer you're putting down, or have you just been following the bag? Let me know in the comments below. And that's it for today's garden tips and tricks. If you found this video helpful, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more gardening tips, lawn care guides, plant care advice, and backyard transformations. Tell me in the comments what gardening problem you'd like covered next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Happy gardening!